We interrupt this record to bring you a special bulletin. The reports of a flying saucer hovering over the city have been confirmed.
Did you really go out with an alien? Uh-huh. What was it like? Real different.
Becoming Human, a Mork and Mindy podcast. Previously on Becoming Human.
Your mission is to report back to me mentally about the things you learn there.
I'm standing here talking to an alien. Do you realize the historic sweep of this? I mean, the world will be astounded.
No, Nap. You see, my mission is to observe Earth. And the only way I can do that is by being one of you I face in the crowd, which is easy because I fit right in.
I distinctly heard him say you were living together.
Well, Mork is a practical joker. Oh, you heard his voice, right? And with a name like Mork, you'd be a practical joker too, right?
About 20 bleams ago, I was here to visit my friend the Fonz. You know him? Hey. Are you interested?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Then I'll take you back. Prepare a time warp sequence.
So now we're in roughly the middle third of the episode, and suddenly it looks like a Happy Days episode, and we get an exterior of the Cunningham house. And it turns out that Fonzie is house sitting for the Cunninghams, who are on vacation. It's possible that this is a reference to the beginning of season 6, where the Cunninghams and friends go to Marion's uncle's dude ranch. And I think Fonzie does join them later. I'd have to watch it again. So hypothetically, that might be almost canonical, but it's not clear when this episode is set as part of the episode, so I'm not sure. I want to say that it's a few months after My Favorite Orkin, but maybe not. So he's house sitting while they're on vacation. The phone rings. He talks to a girl named Mary, who somehow has never heard of him, which of course offends Fonzie. Then an egg lands, and we can see it through the living room window. Just like when Mork showed up before and Richie thought that it was Ralph playing a joke, Fonzie suspects Ralph, although I think Ralph is out at the dude ranch. It's Mork at the door, and he's in his spacesuit, including the helmet. And this is where it gets a little bit weird. As I said, I think maybe in summer reruns they redid the ending of My Favorite Orkin, so it was not a dream. Fonzie is very upset to see Mork, so it can't be that Mork was just a figure in Richie's dream. Mork says that he had to zap Fonzie's mind so he wouldn't go Bozo City. That's something that we will see a lot of, Mork saying something is blank city, and of course he's using a reference to Bozo the Clown because Mork has an awareness of Earth television. Fonzie slaps himself because maybe he's dreaming. Mork imitates him and says he doesn't really get any pleasure out of slapping himself. Even though Mork talks to plants, as I said, he also eats them, so he sees a potted plant and figures it's a snack, although he doesn't actually eat it at this time. He tells Fonzie that he wants to be friends, so I guess when he first shows up, he doesn't see Fonzie as a friend, but he's a potential friend. I don't know. And this time, there's yet another mission. This mission is, when Mork was here before, he noticed an Earth ritual he could not comprehend: men dating women. So there's a few things going on here. One, is this just some sort of side project Mork has, or did he mention it to Orson and then Orson said, hey, you better find out what this dating thing is? Not really clear where he witnessed this. It might have been at Arnold's because there were some couples there. If you recall, Mork had a quote-unquote girl. Not necessarily a girlfriend, but some sort of relationship. He showed a picture of her to Richie, but I guess it's not dating. And then also, he phrases it as men dating women. I'm not sure how much of this was intentional, but there's a connotation here that he is not familiar with, let's say, and this is not an applicable term, particularly with Mork, but opposite sex dating. So Mork says that this drove him Zazbot, which is similar to Shazbot. And it's used from context clues to mean crazy. We'll hear it again a little bit later in the episode. Fonzie was reluctant, in fact scared, to talk to Mork when he first showed up, but now that they're on the subject of dating, that's another story. So Fonzie becomes a lot friendlier. They're talking about it. Fonzie wants to know, don't men date women on your planet, I think he says. And Mork says, it's hard to tell if men date women on Orc because the parts are interchangeable. So that puts another spin on what we learned when he was showing that picture of him and his girl, that they are indistinguishable when they're naked. And it's not explained how the parts interchange, but they still use he and she. It's a little bit complicated. And I guess maybe what's odd to him is on Earth he's perceiving it as it's just men and women and they're very distinct. And why do they date each other? And he wants to know more. So they sit on the couch, but Fonzie doesn't want to talk to Mork if Mork is sitting on his, that is Mork's face, or if Mork sits too close to him. Fonzie has some space issues, and you see this even with his best friend Richie, that there are times that he can be very affectionate and hug people, other men I should say. Other times like, oh no, just don't mess up the hair or my jacket, sit over there. It's pretty much in character for him to react to Mork that way, particularly since Mork does seem to be sexually ambiguous, or at least not what Fonzie is comfortable with. Fonzie talks to Mork about kissing, how men and women and boys and girls kiss. He likes the sound of the word kiss. He kind of tries it out. He says that sliding lips together does not sound appealing, and Fonzie tells him, don't knock it till you try it. In this middle third, Fonzie is introducing Mork into the human ritual of heterosexual dating. And being Fonzie, of course, he has to give some questionable advice and observations. He says that he knows some girls who are willing and able, and some who are unwilling, but you're able to convince them. So, of course, Mork wants to meet a convincing one, as he puts it. Fonzie is reluctant to set Mork up on a date, and he again doesn't want Mork to touch him. Then Mork suggests that he and Fonzie slide lips together. I think it's clear that Mork is not heterosexual. I don't know if you would say he's pansexual, but he's open to possibilities. I guess you could say he's bi-curious. He definitely does not have the same hang-ups that Fonzie does. Part of his nature is to experiment and explore. Although Fonzie said kissing was something that men and women do, I don't think Mork would see anything wrong with men kissing each other, but Fonzie of course does. Mork appeals to Fonzie's vanity and says that Fonz is known throughout the universe for his expertise, and Fonzie is only mildly surprised by this. I don't know if it's literally true, or if Mork is just getting Fonzie to cooperate by praising him. But Fonzie agrees to, okay, he's gonna do a blind date, but first he has to have Mork go up to Richie's room to put on Richie's clothes to look normal. And as we established in My Favorite Orkin, Richie is average and humdrum. So if you dress like him, you're going to pass as an earthling. Fonzie says that Richie's room has lots of stripes and checks and penny loafers. And Mork recalls Richie, and he sings a little Orkin version of Richie's signature tune, Blueberry Hill. Once Mork has gone upstairs, Fonzie observes that it's a good thing that Mork didn't land at Potsy's house. This is another cheap shot at Potsy in his absence. But yes, Potsy would probably give terrible advice about dating and being a human in general. We had, at this point, seen about 4.5 years of him giving bad advice to Richie, plus the Love American Style pilot. So actually, that would be 6.5 years. So Fonzie considers different possibilities for the matchmaking, including the Hooper triplets, who were referred to on My Favorite Orkin. He comes up with somebody, he doesn't say who it is, but it's clearly the right date for Mork, in his opinion. And remember, Fonzie knows, in some cases biblically, I think hundreds of women, I don't know about thousands, but a good portion of the eligible female population of Milwaukee and neighboring cities. He calls up this date, and then we cut to the next scene, and there is Laverne DeFazio, because if you're going to launch a new series, you don't want just the Fonz. You want one of the stars of one of the other top shows of the previous season. Hypothetically, he could have called Shirley. I think it would have been a very different experience for both Mork and Shirley. Fonzie had set Richie up with Shirley in Shirley and Laverne's introduction, A Date with Fonzie, in late 1975. That made sense. Shirley, particularly in that incarnation, was the right girl to boost Richie's confidence during the dating slump. I think she would have been very sweet with Mork, but it would have been a different feel. Laverne has an image on her own show and on Happy Days and somewhat here as being not quite a tramp or easy, or, but there is a sense that if things go well, she's going to at least make out with Mork. She dates a wide variety of men. She'll show him a good time, as they say. So she shows up at his door, and she's yelling at somebody. I think it's the bus driver. Then she greets Fonzie with a kiss. I don't think they were ever officially an item or a couple, but they went out multiple times. Even when they're not on a date, they do have the kind of relationship where they can greet each other with a kiss. So he tells her about the date, and she wants somebody tall, dark, and handsome, which is mostly Laverne's type. I mean, she also likes blondes, but definitely tall and handsome. Then he starts to describe Mork, and she says she doesn't like foreigners because they talk funny. Best case scenario, I think this is a joke about Penny Marshall's accent and kind of a joke on Laverne, but it just comes across weird. And I don't think Shirley would have said that. I think Shirley would have seen Mork as exotic, and she would have attempted to speak French to him. That would have been a whole different feel. I'm not sure why they decided to go in that direction. Laverne on her own series is kind to a German immigrant who faints in her living room. And of course, she herself is maybe third generation American. I think her grandparents may have come from Italy. It's tonally weird. Could have had some other objection, but that was the one they went with. So Fonzie sends her outside because he says he's got to explain some things to Mork. I'm not sure why. It feels a little bit clumsy. What else does he have to explain to Mork? And why didn't he just go upstairs and talk to him before Laverne arrived? Mork re-enters, and he's in presumably one of Richie's outfits, and he's wearing jeans, a check shirt with a white undershirt. Fonzie says he wants to get something straight with him. I'm not going to take that in a sexual orientation way, although you could. One thing about Mork is he can be very literal, and so he tries to straighten out his whole body, which annoys Fonzie. They want to discuss kissing more. Fonzie says that kissing is for physical pleasure. Then the episode takes another odd turn when Mork confesses to an illegal act. And he's very reluctant. He's very ashamed of this, and Fonzie is titillated by this, though it's not clear what the difference, if any, is between men and women on his planet. If an Orkin woman touches an Orkin man on the wrist, he becomes aroused, and this happened to Mork. He responds even when Fonzie touches his own wrist. This is exciting in a dangerous kind of way to Mork. It drives him zazbat. Once a woman did this to Mork, and he became a beast, and he jerked her earlobe. And then he sobs in Fonzie's arms. And Fonzie allows this, which is a little bit of a surprise, but maybe he can just see how distraught Mork is. And so he actually comforts him, which is sweet, sort of. So Laverne said she's going to wait 2 minutes. She comes back in. She is clearly attracted to Mork. He is not tall. He is dark. Whether Robin Williams is handsome, I guess, is debatable. I think he was adorable. I think he was very cute. And he was good looking, but definitely not traditionally handsome. She kind of does some little physical signals, which he imitates. She starts calling him Morky, as more of an endearment. Which is interesting because on her own series, her closest friends, she tends to shorten their names. So that Shirley becomes Shirl, Lenny is Len, Squiggy is Squig, but here she's kind of doing a cutesy Morky. She holds out her hand and he does nano to it, and she questions this. Pretty upsetting to her. She thinks that Fonzie has fixed her up with another jerk, which implies that he has fixed her up with at least one other jerky guy in the past. And then of course Mork does the jerk dance, which I don't think was around yet in 1960. If this is 1960, it's I think a couple years early. Who knows? Maybe Mork invented it and it swept the nation. Fonzie kind of pulls Mork aside and tells him to imitate Laverne because she knows what she's doing. She knows the ropes. I expected a smutty joke, but it doesn't go in that direction. Fonzie goes upstairs and tells them to knock their socks off. At least he's in the building. He hasn't left Laverne alone with this strange man, but he's also giving them some privacy. I had forgotten the setup to this joke, but we find out that Orc has been off Greece for at least 5 bleems, which would be 10,000 years. They now use other lubricants, Viz, Gus, and the ever-popular Lemocoke. This, again, did not go in a smutty direction, though I half expected it to. Lemocoke sounds like lemon coke, but I'm not really sure where they were going with that. And I don't know if that's a gas shortage joke or not. And don't forget, his flying saucer spaceship was powered by baloney, so fuel is different on Orc. He asks if it's time to flatter her, so she says sure. So he says he likes the fungus in her hair, which is the little white flower she's wearing. He asks if it's time to kiss, and she says no. We get some more human lessons here. He says he's new at the dating ritual, and he asks her what the next step is. So she has him sit on the couch, and of course he sits on his face. She is amazed by this. He doesn't even realize what he's done, even though at this point he's already had Richie and Fonzie tell him how to sit. Although they don't say sit on it, oddly enough. So she sits and he says that it's Fonz-like, and he says must adjust and copy. So that's what happens. He is going to copy her. She does all these little moves, and now it's not little flirtatious signals, it's sort of just movements of nervousness. So he is doing that. It's some really nice physical comedy. I do like things about this middle segment, although I have issues with it. I do feel that Penny Marshall and Robin Williams play off of each other very well, but it's the direction it ends up going in, as well as that whole foreigner thing that I have a problem with. So she thinks he's making fun of her, and she says she doesn't like when guys do that. She threatens to give him a fat lip, and he feels rejected, and he regresses to hatchling state. He becomes like a baby, and this would be something we would see a lot of on Mork and Mindy. Mork acting like a baby or a very small child. It is endearing at times, but it can also be a little bit disturbing. I don't know if this brings out her maternal instinct, but she tries to comfort him, and unfortunately she touches his wrist. So he gets very excited. He tells himself, maintain, maintain. And I think that that's something that recurs on this series. Mork, as we'll see through his arc, has to balance the Orcan disapproval of emotions with the awakening of emotions. And he does not handle that well, particularly early on. And this is an extreme example. The Zazbot takes over. He starts chasing her. He wants to jerk her lobe. He says gang nab, and I don't know if that is the ear jerking or what that is, but it's connected to this whole thing. She kicks him, and then he kicks her twice, thinking that this is part of, I don't know, the mating ritual maybe. And so he's chasing her around the living room and into the kitchen, and then she finally runs upstairs calling to Fonzie for help. And Mork says, "I think she likes me." And it is played for laughs, but it's a little bit creepy. Laverne and Shirley has its own issues, as does Happy Days, with how they treat the threat of sexual assault as a joke quite often. It's unfortunate to see it here. It is played as lightly and comedically as they could, but I feel like there were other directions they could have taken this. Something with Mork just simply being weird and Laverne being frightened or disgusted, but not like this. Or maybe they could have made out and he would not know how to process the emotion. There were so many other things to do, but this is what they did. They decided, wouldn't it be funny if Fonzie set up a blind date between Mork and Laverne? And this is how that was interpreted. That is the middle third of the episode. So the flashback ends and Mork is still lusting after Laverne's lobes. However many bleems it's been, she's got some damn sexy ears. Mindy is amused by this. She's not offended. I assume he told the story as it happened. He then imitates what is either a Shakespearean actor or the Jeffersons, which he has been watching on television. This whole day of television. Maybe the Jeffersons were in syndication and he caught them that way. I mean, he seems to have watched quite a bit, although maybe some of this is not necessarily what he watched that day, but like over the course of years of study, bleams of study of Earth. Mindy likes this voice compared to his usual Orkin voice, and she thinks he should use a modified version of that without the twas and the twits, and he says all twy, which also made me laugh out loud. So she wants him to practice, and she grabs 2 books off the coffee table, and they both turn out to be suggestive, including one about a senator grabbing his shorts and running out of the room, which says something about Mindy, what her leisure reading is. One thing about Mork and Mindy, despite the sex jokes and other oddities that we'll see as we go along, it is very much a Gary Marshall kids show, and there are lessons to be learned, I think, even more than on Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. And we'll see this with the weekly wrap-up with Orson. But even at this point in the episode, where we're not yet done, Mork reviews the 3 lessons he's learned so far, and these are all ways to become human, or to at least pass as an earthling. The phony voice, as he calls it. He should not drink with his finger, and he should not sit on his face. She says the 4th thing is she shouldn't tell her father they're living together. It hasn't been specifically stated, but it's implied that Fred and Mindy don't live together, that she's moved out on her own, because otherwise he would know that Mork was staying with her and had talked all night. Fred comes in quietly without knocking. I don't know if the door is locked or if he has his own key, but apparently he just feels he has the right to enter his 21-year-old daughter's home without calling ahead or announcing himself. And he is aghast at what he overhears. He's offended morally, but also just that his little girl isn't his little girl anymore. She tries to reason with him, but he won't listen. Mork doesn't get it. He just says goodbye because he doesn't know. He obviously didn't grow up with a father of any kind. Also, Orkin emotions are repressed. So the next scene, we go back to the music store. It's late at night, and Deputy Tilwick drops by. He turns out to be Fred's old friend, who we will never see again, if I remember correctly. and he is played by Jeffrey Lewis. Fred is drunk on champagne that he has been saving from 1967 for Mindy's wedding, and Mindy would have been about 10 at the time. He had really been looking forward to this wedding, and he might even have conducted the band. He wants to toast to the old days, to old values and morals. Not only does he prefer old music, but he is an old-fashioned man. He says he remembers when sharing a pad meant borrowing a notebook. This is, of course, long before iPads. So it's a cute little pun. Deputy Tilwick can't believe that Mindy is living with a man. He knows her, presumably has seen her grown up. I'm not sure how much I need to explain about the 70s. Or at least 70s television, TV sitcoms, because that is not the same thing as real life 70s. So, 1978, one of the top series, along with Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley, was Three's Company. It was going into its third season at that time. The premise was that a man and two women were living platonically together, but nobody could believe that it was platonic. They had to convince people, which might be their dates or the judgmental landlord, that nothing was going on. In some cases, it was because they went with Janet's lie that Jack is gay. That's what they tell Chrissy's mother, although Chrissy's father, I believe, different setup with him. And he's a minister, a Methodist minister. And so anyway, they have to convince everyone that nothing's going on, but at the same time, the audience is titillated with the possibility that something might happen. And there are misunderstandings about this and about other things. There is also, as the series goes on, a great deal of partially unintentional ship teasing with Jack and Janet, which I think became more conscious after the series left the air. Mork and Mindy would take its own path. There were other TV shows, obviously on the dramas. There was more quote-unquote living in sin. This is a kid's show, but there's still that thing of Mork and Mindy are living together, unmarried. It definitely starts out platonic, but even in this first episode, they're laying down the groundwork for their eventual romance. I'm not sure how much of that was deliberate. I also think of Who's the Boss, which came along in 1984 and was not actually supposed to have Tony and Angela as a ship tease, but Tony Danza and Judith Light had such chemistry that they went in that direction and ship teased for 7 seasons and had a shaky resolution of that in season 8. I think it's possible that if Pam Dauber and Robin Williams didn't have chemistry, that it wouldn't have gone in that direction. There might have still been misunderstandings of what their relationship was, but it would have firmly stayed in the platonic zone. That's where we are at the moment. That Mindy will see in a subsequent scene. She does not see this as anything but platonic. I'm not sure if she perceives Mork as male per se. It started out with her thinking he was a priest, and in her mind that means he's celibate. He does tell her this story about him being aroused on a blind date. But I think at this point, she is not looking for any kind of romance with Mork, and I don't think he is looking for that with her either. But of course, her father assumes, and totally unreasonably, that her moving in with a man within minutes, I mean at least hours of first introduction, is a little bit suspicious, and so he assumes that there must be a romantic and or sexual relationship here. And this offends his old-fashioned sensibilities. In real life, people shacking up was a whole different story, but I'm talking about 70s and 80s sitcoms, especially on ABC, and how Mork and Mindy fits into that context. Deputy Tilwick says he can't believe that Mindy is living with a man, and Fred says, she's a loose woman, and I don't know how to tighten her, which is a little oddly phrased. Deputy Tilwick, being the family friend that he is, says he will go over and scare Mork off. Even uses the phrase law and order. I don't think he's meant to be entirely sympathetic. Abuse of power, definitely. And he says he's going over there the next morning. I think now we're on day 3 for the next scene. Mork is talking to the eggs from the fridge.
As much as I like Mindy, it's against intergalactic law to eat fellow space travelers. Fly, be free! Well, I guess we'll have to have a quick burial at sea, then. I'll notify your next of kin. Your brother bit the big one.
He calls the refrigerator the cold machine, and he tries to warm up the eggs, so he leaves them around, and this is an obvious setup that somebody is going to end up sitting on an egg. And sure enough, Deputy Tilwick shows up, and Mork calls him Smokey, which was 70s slang, I believe, from CB radios, because of Smokey the Bear. So Mork has picked that up. Deputy Tilwick thinks Mork is in a fraternity and has a secret handshake. So again, as on My Favorite Orkin, comes across as a frat bro. And of course he's suspicious that Mork doesn't work. We get a bit of a sex joke when the deputy says that Mork is spongy off Mindy, and Mork says, oh no, we've never taken a bath together. When Tilwick scolds him, Mork imitates his twang, which is not really a Colorado accent, and he says that the lowest form of life is a gedge, vodge, and the ever-crawling rebajidge. When the deputy is worried that Mork will hurt Mindy, Mork says he would never allow Mindy to be hurt. Not only is this a contrast to the psychopathic killer that we met on My Favorite Orkin, but it already shows a little bit of an attachment to Mindy. Then Mork slips into his alien voice, his natural voice, and asks if Deputy Tilwick is a member of Space Patrol, because he's wearing a uniform. The deputy slips into 60s slang and thinks that Mork is putting him on, and Mork says, putting you on? You're not even hollow. Not sure if that's a sex joke. It's still good. And he wonders if this member of Space Patrol has been sent by Ork to help Mork with his friends, the eggs. And we get the word Nimnol again. So then we go to the next scene, back to the music store. The deputy talks to Fred about arresting Mork. He didn't want to, but he had to because Mork is bonkers, and he is going to have a sanity hearing tomorrow, which will be day 4, I guess. So Mindy overhears this. She's understandably upset. She's mad at her dad, and then her dad is mad at the deputy, who is this old family friend who meant well, definitely overstepped his responsibilities because he did enter a private home, even if it is the home of a friend of the family still. Then we get an exterior shot of the Boulder County Justice Center. It's Mork's sanity hearing, judge's chambers, and it's not open to the public, but Mindy and Fred burst in. They are character witnesses, although Fred says personally he never liked Mork, which makes it sound like they've known each other for months at the least. It seems a little odd to say never after 2 or 3 days, but okay. Mindy says she wants to ask one little question, but instead she gives a speech from her notes, an impassioned speech about the importance of individuality and the God-given right to be eccentric. It's a very Mindy speech. She is trying to be good and follow the rules, but she has things that she feels strongly about, and we'll see this as the series progresses and her character grows. In a sense, she's a college student who has taken on a cause, but there's also a personal interest that she's very fond of Mork, despite their very short acquaintance. She also feels some responsibility as the human liaison to Mork during his stay on her planet. And just the simple injustice of it that This is the 70s. It is the me decade. It is follow your bliss and do your own thing. Mork, his thing that he is doing is very odd, but she supports it, and that's pretty cool. And very Mindy. The judge makes Mindy and her father sit down. They continue the hearing. Dr. Litney, who is the psychiatrist who examined Mork, says that Mork is childlike and antisocial, and he is incompetent to function in society. So Mindy encourages Mork to stand up for himself, and it turns out that he saw Perry Mason and Inherit the Wind last night. This is while he's in custody. He does nanu at the judge, and he asks to speak for himself. He puts on glasses and goes into a lawyer act with a Gregory Peck Southern accent. He interrogates Dr. Litney, who objects, and Mork continues. He successfully rebuts Dr. Litney, even when Dr. Litney points out that Mork is wearing a wristwatch on his ankle. Mork is able to point out that actually it is an ankle watch on his ankle. I'm not clear how Orkin men would be able to wear wristwatches without constantly being aroused, but maybe that's why they drifted towards ankle watches. And he uses Dr. Litney's words against him, which proves that he is actually able to learn and function in society. And he even uses the tools of psychology against Dr. Litney. He fits a square peg into a round hole, which is a great symbol. Now it's stuck. That's very upsetting to Dr. Litney. And then Mork does word association, and the last word he says is sex, which sets off a string of confessions of romantic involvement with Dr. Litney and Pamela, the stenographer, and the prosecuting attorney. So I should mention the cast at this point. With the guest cast, we've got Dick Yarmy as Dr. Litney. Michael Prince is the judge. Woody Ennie is the prosecuting attorney, and Leslie Vallon is the court reporter known as Pamela. People are upset and they run out of the room. Mork says the defense rests, and yes, he sits on his face. The judge pretty much doesn't see the point in going on, although the defendant has brought new dimensions to the word eccentric. He's going to dismiss the court because most of the people are gone. The only person left besides Mork and the McConnells is Mork's ineffectual defense attorney, who has not really done anything for him and is just court appointed. Mindy says, we won. She definitely sees this as a victory for not only Mork, but for her and Mork. To some degree, her father, who at least is there as support. And she hugs Mork, which is sweet. So then we get the tag, and this sets up the tag for nearly all the episodes with Mork reporting to Orson.
Mork calling Orson. Come in, Orson. Mork calling Orson. Come in, Orson. Mork calling Orson. Come in, Orson. Come in, laser breath.
We find out that Earth is only 60 million light years away. Then we get the lessons part of his report. Mork says he's learned a lot, and there's so much to comprehend. The main thing, though, seems to be that everyone on Earth is an individual, and they're proud of it. Orson asks how society can function this way, and Mork says not very well, which is proved by him almost being locked up. And he says this is because they thought his mind was imperfect. And Orson, who is definitely not one to say anything positive about Earth, says, intelligent life, because they've spotted that Mork's mind is imperfect. Part of what Mork is processing, and that he can't wrap up in a neat little message, especially at this point, is that he's confused by Mindy coming to his defense. He knows it has something to do with emotions. Orson tells them that this is worth investigating more closely because it's interesting if irrational.
Orson, this may sound strange, but knowing that someone would do that for me, well, it makes me feel really good inside.
Just remember, Mork, you're sent there to observe, not to get involved.
Yes, Your Immenseness.
And the episode closes on Mork saying, "Nanu, nanu." In general, this is a really solid introduction to the series. A rebooting of who Mork was on Happy Days into a friendlier, more likable character, also more human-like. Even though he is different than humans, he is more sympathetic to them, more interested in them. Mindy is a great foil for him, just as Pam Dauber was for Robin Williams. She is quite clearly, and when I say she, I mean both Pam and Mindy, just very, very amused and delighted by this strange new man in her life. And that dynamic is there. She is somewhat wary of him, but she is definitely intrigued. We have the setup of her father disapproving of Mork. He does not yet know that Mork is an alien, but what he does know, these are not qualities he's looking for in a son-in-law. I'm not sure in the end how Mindy convinces her father to let Mork continue to stay. That may be covered in future episodes. Maybe she just told him the simple truth that it is platonic, because it is at this point. Maybe he realized he had overreacted. But we have that, and it's not an unusual... It's sort of a proto-father-in-law, son-in-law relationship, a little bit similar to That Girl, where you had Donald Hollinger, who was pretty much the perfect boyfriend for Anne, and he was respectable, he was a gentleman, but her father disapproved because that's his little girl, and Donald is a threat to that. That is a common motif, and we see a version of that there. Fred is not, as I said, is not entirely off base. There is definitely something off about Mork. If Fred knew what Mork was like when he visited Richie, he would certainly have cause for concern that Mork would be violent, but that's just been sort of hand-waved, and that is not who Mork is now. And then, of course, we have Cora set up as another foil. We didn't really see her interact too much with Mindy. We will get a really nice grandmother-granddaughter relationship there. Here we're definitely seeing the father-daughter thing, but we get Cora and Fred butting heads. Will continue through season 1. Of course, everything changes in season 2, but that is one of the basics of that family dynamic. And then, as I said, we get Eugene, who is there to be the kid representative and to also be Mork's first friend outside of Mindy's family, and to show that side. Eugene is somewhat of a stereotypical 70s black kid, like on Different Strokes, but it's a fairly benign stereotype. I think that Eugene is a likable kid. In a sense, he's every kid. I think it's handled pretty well here. All those other people that Mork interacts with the exception of Fonzie, we would never see again. There will be recurring characters down the road, but basically it is those 5: Mindy, her grandmother, her father, Eugene, and Mork. And how they all play off of each other will be explored more, and more outsiders will come along. In this episode, the outsiders are mostly unappealing, from Bill stealing Mindy's Jeep onto the legal and psychiatric figures and the law enforcement officer that we meet. These are people who are antagonistic to Mork and or Mindy. That will change, but it definitely sets up a dynamic, which I think in a way you do need on the first episode. You don't want to feel that although Boulder looks like a very pretty, welcoming 70s, easygoing kind of mellow town, at least this version of it, you have to believe that there are hostile, unwelcoming forces out there that Mork will not be able to win over, as he will win over Fred eventually. There has to be some risk. There has to be not just simply that Mork's mission will fail if his cover is blown, but that there are threats to him as a person, and thus indirectly to Mindy. We'll return to that in different forms as the series goes on. But a lot of the series is really about why I named this Becoming Human. It is about Mork getting lessons in being an Earthling. He's a slow learner in some ways. I mean, he has been taught how to sit multiple times, but he's kind of slow on that. And yet, on the other hand, he is very quick to adapt to Earth, particularly American pop culture and culture from Shakespeare to the Jeffersons. To some extent, not only is Eugene a representative of Generation X, but Mork is. He learns through television, and there will be a line in a first season episode that kind of lampshades this. Being a very TV crazy kid, I think that was part of the appeal of Mork. But I think also Mindy is somebody that you can identify with. She is down to earth. In a sense, she's the girl next door. Pam Dauber is very, very pretty, but not in an unattainable way. She just seems like somebody that you could befriend. Mindy has that quality. The little I know of Pam Dauber, she comes across that way as well. The chemistry between her and Robin is really sweet. Even in this first episode, watching it just all the way through earlier today without taking notes, I kept thinking the word adorable, because it is an adorable episode. Much of that has to do with them, and as I said, you see that even in the opening credits. Let's talk about ranking. I use a 4-egg rating system. I may change how I'm defining that, but for now, I'm rating it as, how is this as a Mork and Mindy episode? To some degree, that is, how entertaining is it, or thought-provoking, because some of them are moving, interesting, significant, but it's also just how much Mork and Mindy-ness is there in this episode. And I'm going to actually go with a 3.5. Tempted to give it a 3. That middle third is obviously not Mork and Mindy, but because it is a story that Mork is telling Mindy and it has to do with his adjustments to Earth, it does count. It is an amazing crossover that there was this moment in time when Henry Winkler, Penny Marshall, and Robin Williams were all playing off of each other with their iconic characters. Obviously, Robin in particular would go on to have other characters that he was just as strongly identified with. To some degree, Penny remained Laverne. I mean, she did a hell of a lot, including directing, but that is the character that I think she's most identified with. And Henry Winkler, I think, despite everything else he's done in his career, I think he is perfectly fine being known as the Fonz through eternity. You have those three performers, you have those three characters, and how they play off of each other is really interesting. As I said, I'm not super happy with the direction it took, but I still find it fascinating. I think it is a 3.5 out of 4 as a Mork and Mindy episode. You get the basic setup and the characters. It's a very funny episode, very quotable. The characters are vivid. There are a lot of the catchphrases. There is the Mork and Mindy dynamic and the dynamic with the other characters. It's not the ultimate Mork and Mindy episode, but it is a strong pilot letting you know this is what Mork and Mindy is. What Mork and Mindy is will change, but that is the basics. As far as my other rating scale, which I talked about on episode 0, which was a -1, this is a 4-point scale, but with hearts, and it is about the viability of the romance between Mork and Mindy, because although I do feel that they are wonderful best friends as things develop, there is that romantic element. It is so gently, lightly hinted at here with their concern for each other and their not quite understanding their own feelings. You know, some of it is convenience of TV, that she has to say, sure, I'm going to live with you. I've got some doubts, but we'll go for it. We've only got an hour to set this up after all. But I think there's an instant connection. That said, I don't think you can really call it romantic as such. I'm going to give it half a heart, half-heartedly. You know, if you squint, you see it, but it's not standing on top of the table singing at the top of their lungs that they love each other. They're just interested. They're getting to know each other. They're meeting cutely. 3.5 eggs, half a heart. Next week, we'll get into one of the regular half-hour-long episodes. And so this podcast will be shorter, but I did want to go into detail on this because it is 50 minutes chock full of a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. This has been Paula Schaffner with episode 1, the pilot. Thank you for listening, and nanu nanu one more time.
I found my thrill on Blueberry Hill.
I got another date, Richard?
Yeah, how'd you know that, Dad?
Just a lucky guess.
Oh. I found my thrill.
Richard!